I know I've thought before, you wonder what sort of difference you're making in the thoughts of the people to whom you're preaching. And you see things that these people whom you love and who are good people, Christian believing people, but you see things that they put on Facebook. There are things they share, content they share that gives you windows into how they think and what they believe, opinions that they express at church or to you interpersonally. And it can feel as though such a large percent of your church just already has their minds made up about everything. And even if they're hungry for a word from the Lord, it's possible that they're not looking to the ministry staff at their local congregation for that word. They've got their own podcasts, they've got their own Christian celebrities, and they're being discipled, willingly discipled by these other people. So then as a minister, it's just delicate, tricky. What do you say in the cacophony of voices? And how do you add to that, or how do you slice through it and do some good in your church? And then you labor through a difficult season, and you pray and you work to hold the congregation together, and you still then see people who walk out the door because the church didn't handle this thing during the pandemic well. And you think, I don't know if anybody can do this. Is my work making any difference? Are people listening to what I'm saying? Is God using this?
Something happened
in the midst of this culture.
What you're describing, your experience is all of a sudden now.
And it's an intentional journey.
And that end is relationship with God.
Well, Matt Love, welcome back to Faith in the Folds, my friend. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing great. Yeah, great. Grateful to get to share some moments with you, Kevin.
Good. I am going to remind everybody to go check out our interview from, I think it was 2021. So I'm coming up on 2 years of the podcast with about 60 or so episodes in. And Matt, you were one of the first ones, and it was basically asked you a question about kind of growth in ministry. Really, to start us off this morning, I wanted to ask you to just update us with what are you doing these days? How are you proceeding along in school? Give us, kind of update us on what's going on, and that will very naturally lead into the other topic that I wanted to cover today.
Right. Well, I was going to mention that I'm grateful to be back on after seeing some of your guests who are pretty prominent figures in the church, and so feel honored to be not just on the front end of that, but now coming back.
Are you talking about Luke Dockery?
Yes, Luke Dockery, chiefly Luke Dockery, and then others, minor figures like Ben Witherington or whoever. So
Len Kohut, Nijay Gupta, Craig Keener, the great folks. I got to run into basically all those people at SBL back in November, and it was really fun being able to go up to a couple of them. It's like, hey, thanks for being on Faith in the Folds. It's good to meet you in person.
Yeah, so neat to. One of the things that I've noticed in my education is some of the networking, the doors that it opens just to relationships, to know those people, is just a neat gift.
Yeah, definitely. So Matt, what have you been up to, man?
Yeah, I'm still working at the church that I was at a year ago, and I've been here now for 12 years. I'm still preaching, and it feels like we are have moved through the post-pandemic era, still in it some. It's definitely still in the background, but that feels good that church seems to be a lot more normal, what I would call normal.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that. My family's doing well. We are expecting one in 2 months.
Whoa,
Don't know
congratulations.
yet. Thank you. Thank you. We don't know yet if it's a boy or a girl. We're going to wait and find out at the birth.
Wow. Okay. The way people did it for literally thousands of years.
Yeah. So we have one of each. And so it's our third, and we thought it'd be a great one to just be surprised on.
Yeah.
And we've got stuff for boys and girls, so it's like, the grandparents aren't as in our faces about getting things embroidered, that kind of thing on the front end.
Yeah, you
So,
definitely sound like you've been through this a couple times.
yeah. But
That's great.
so ministry and family are good. And in my doctoral studies, I am at Baylor University at the Truett Seminary in their PhD in preaching program. I am in the very first class to move through that. I was in the inaugural cohort.
Yeah.
And still in that. At this point, I'm ABD. I had my comprehensive exams about a month and a half ago. And
how are those?
they were fine. They were some good work on the front end that we had to submit, and then that week was still stressful and emotionally taxing, but it was doable. And then we preached also, since it's a PhD in preaching was part of that. So that's the strange thing that I was mostly nervous about, was the sermon, and not
Really?
the other of it. For whatever reason, I didn't want to bomb the sermon.
Sure.
And
I would think the sermon is the thing you have the most control over.
Yeah. I think that's how the other students felt, and I did not feel that way. And 7 years of preaching experience, and I still feel like I don't know what I'm doing. So it's a strange. I don't know if this relates to you at all, but being in a PhD program, you initially have like an imposter syndrome to a degree of like, I don't belong here. I'm not as smart as these people. If they only knew that I don't belong. And then at some points you think, no, I am as I do belong. And it's not necessarily about being the brightest crown in the box. But then, even being at this point, all but dissertation, at points I look back on preaching, I think there's so much that I don't know. I still feel like a traveler through this land of preaching. And I don't know if you feel that way with New Testament studies, where you just think, I just know so little still, and I'm supposed to be an expert.
Yeah. And that's especially prominent coming up because I'm going to be teaching an intensive course at Harding School of Theology this spring semester as New Testament survey. I know the Gospels pretty well. I know certain of Paul's letters really well. I've had enough of an interest in Revelation to be able to talk, I think, competently about it. But that still leaves a lot of the New Testament. Some of Paul's bigger letters. Romans is just so massive. I know my favorite verses out of Romans. 2 Corinthians is the poor stepchild of the Pauline epistles that people just don't really know that much about compared to 1 Corinthians. And there's a lot more, especially in some of the general epistles, that I can speak competently on, but to be able to carry a conversation during an intensive course, or just to be able to answer really any potential question that comes up, it's like man, that's daunting. Yeah, imposter syndrome is real. Thankfully, I know that for my New Testament studies at Asbury, HST prepared us incredibly well. I know Pavo Tucker, Jordan Guy, and Garrett Best would all say the same thing. 3 other guys from HST went to Asbury, and we were all kind of there. We all overlapped for at least a little bit. And I know they would all say that they were really well prepared. So I'm really pleased with with the education that I got at HST, even though it doesn't have the name brand recognition like like a Truett Seminary or some other place like that, where you could go from there, get your master's onto maybe a Duke or a Yale or someplace, or an Emory or someplace like that, fairly easily. Hear those air quotes, right? Fairly easily. But man, HST prepared us incredibly well. So
Yeah, I would agree with that. As far as the preparation goes for the coursework and the doctoral level, I felt prepared by HST in the very same ways that you're saying.
Yeah. So Matt, as you're getting a PhD in preaching, talk to us a little bit about what all that entails. Normally, I would think that might be something that one would pursue maybe a doctorate of ministry for. But that's not what you're doing. You're getting a PhD in preaching. What kinds of things do y'all do in a PhD in preaching program?
Yeah, and some of this I don't have intimate knowledge of doctor of ministry coursework, and don't have any other experience in any other PhD program. So I have a very anecdotal, limited experience in this program. Several things come to mind. I mean, and some of these will overlap with the DMin, or a DMin with a focus in preaching. But I've been really grateful at Baylor that there's been a practical emphasis in our preaching. Probably at least half of my coursework we've had to preach, which is really strange. When you think of a PhD level, I don't think that's typically something that's required of most programs. Along with that, we're doing the coursework is seminars, so that we're doing a lot of presentations, 1 or 2 presentations every week of class that we have, but then also that practical component of preaching. So, which I'm grateful for as a practitioner of preaching, that this is not just abstract or theoretical, but the degree is designed to help me become a better preacher, and then also to help me help others become better preachers. So this isn't the design of this program isn't just a theoretical, abstracted study into homiletics. Yeah. As great as that might be, but for myself, and I would say most, if not all of my classmates, that's the sort of emphasis that we want, is something that's going to end up truly impacting the church, local congregations in direct ways. So preaching, and then feedback from classmates and from professors on that, which has been really rich. I think one of my favorite things at the doctoral level is having not just your professor, but everyone in the room is in some sense a professor. And I guess that's true all the way back at a master's level too, that you benefit from community and from others' perspectives. Yeah. But so neat that, in my class, I've got 10, I mean, at this point, with 3 or 4 cohorts coming through, 10 or 12 different burgeoning experts in this, in this field, who are kind of like me. And it's easy to think that as a preacher, depending on the community of people that you have, that you feel isolated, or there's not many people like me in the world. Or if you have a scholarly interest in homiletics and still emphasize preaching and working in the church, you think, how many people like me are there? And to just see people who think like I do, who spend their time like I do, who care about the things that I do, has been pretty awesome. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I also found it interesting too when you said that you're not just working on yourself becoming a better preacher, but also you feel like you're getting training to help others become better preachers. Matt, can you, for someone who does not enjoy preaching, like myself,
that is, that is one thing that that I'm happy to do it when I need to, but I much prefer teaching in a Bible class setting or something along those lines. For someone like myself who doesn't necessarily enjoy preaching, what kinds of things have you been doing to help others, or what kinds of things have you been learning to help others get better at preaching?
Well, that's a big question. That's like, what do you do to help someone become healthier and physically healthier? It's like, there's a lot of things.
Give us one or two really, really juicy tidbits, and then we'll move on to what we're going to talk about for the rest of the time.
Well, I think that less is more, and there is one of the things that I've been learning about my own preaching is the need for clarity. Your message that you're trying to deliver may be crystal clear to you, or you may think that it is. And then when it comes out after the end of the 30-minute sermon, no one in the room really knew what you were talking about,
Yeah.
or however many people there are in the room have that many different ideas of what you were saying. There's not a clear, this is what this person was really driving at in the sermon. And one of the things that's really helped me a lot is not starting writing my manuscript too soon. And I'm a manuscript preacher, and I usually use notes when I preach.
Explain that for maybe people who don't know what you mean by manuscript.
Yeah, so manuscript is basically every word of the sermon that I'm going to say.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean that I only say those words, but the sermon on paper is an entire sermon. There's not gaps in it. It's not just an outline of moves or whatever. So the complete sermon I've put on paper during the week, and then hopefully internalized it to a fair degree where I can not get up and read this, but refer very minimally to my notes. And some of my professors would say, don't use notes. And a lot of my classmates would say, don't use notes at all. But I kind of have the crutch still of using them. But yeah, so the manuscript, what I'm tempted to do is try to get the sermon done. And one of the ways to try to get it done is start writing that manuscript and then get it all out.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've learned that's really helped my preaching is not to start writing too soon, that I need to develop my central idea, what I'm really trying to say, and then a very strong outline. And if I can do those, if I can get the parts really clear in my mind and how they fit together and what I'm trying to say, then the writing is a cakewalk. It's easy. And the sermon is so much stronger and so much clearer. I don't ramble.
And people always appreciate that.
Absolutely. So that's one tidbit that I'd throw out there. Clarity, the importance of clarity.
I like that. Yeah. And especially for those who tend to preach a little bit longer, the a focus on clarity can help maybe tighten that up a little bit, focus it a little bit more. It's one thing to know what you're going to say, right? And then, you kind of feel the Spirit move you a little bit. So you just lean a little more heavily into one of your points, go off script a little bit. I also manuscript my sermons word for word. And I am at that point, I have thought about what I want to say. And so what I'm doing then on stage is performing that, not in a crass or disingenuous way, but I think you would understand, but maybe the audience might not catch that to some degree it is a performance. I'm wanting to evoke certain responses in the crowd. I'm hoping that people will think about what I've said. I'm hoping that they'll be moved, convicted, encouraged, whatever is necessary. But occasionally I'll even tell our guys who are running the slides in the back, it's like, guys, I'm gonna go off script for a second. And so they'll just keep their finger there where I am. And then I'll riff on a point a little bit more closely, a little more carefully, and one that's really more pastorally pointed to what I know for a fact our members are dealing with at that time. But yeah, I like that focus on clarity. So, Matt, you gave us a couple of months ago now on Facebook this absolutely dynamite post entitled, "How Can I Support My Minister?" And I can't remember if I saw this from you first or if I had seen it from some mutual friends first, but I clicked on it, and based on all the shares that I had seen, when I clicked on it and this massive tome came out on this post, normally I just breeze past those. It's like, man,
Yeah.
don't use Facebook as your blog. That's usually how
Yeah.
how I respond to those. But
Oops.
because of who all had shared it, I thought, okay, well, they thought this was worthwhile. I'll give it a look and read through here. And man, I really enjoyed what all you said in this post that I will link to in the description below. You talked a little bit about how it was alarming to you and to many others to hear about recent trends in ministry, particularly ministers leaving congregational ministry settings. First off, start us off just kind of briefly. What is going on with congregational ministry, and why are so many ministers seeming to abandon their posts at congregational ministry?
Oh, that's a big question. I do not claim to be an expert here in this, except these anecdotal, articles that I see online or some podcast conversations. But mainly, what engendered that post were personal conversations and overhearing about situations of people who are either leaving ministry, considering leaving ministry completely, or looking for another congregation. And that's been a trend for the last few years. I think it's been exacerbated by the pandemic era of the last couple of years. But really troubling to me to hear so many people who are stepping away from their current posts, looking for something else, entertaining those ideas more than ever. And I think that that's troubling for not just ministers, but for churches. And as someone who believes in preaching, I believe in a strong pulpit. And someone has said probably a couple hundred years ago that strong churches are not built around weak pulpits. And that doesn't just mean the preacher, but I think we could include in that leadership in general. And if you zoom out even more then to your ministry staff, to shepherds and deacons, leaders in the church, I think you could see a similar discouragement even in those leadership posts, a similar trend of discouragement of anyone who's trying to lead in any capacity the church. So yeah, I think that that's troubling, not just for the career of ministry, but I think it's troubling for the church. And it's not surprising, since, as I think everyone is aware, that the church in the West and the church in the United States, we could say, is I wouldn't say that it's as strong as ever. I think that the ground is shifting and has shifted underneath of us, and many of us feel the impact of that. So along with that comes this small, at least, exodus from ministry or from this church to that church. And as someone who, I don't want to pride myself in this, but I think I do care about the church in general. I care about my church, and I hope that churches would have strong leaders, good teachers. Yeah, it's disconcerting to me, troubling.
Yeah. You mentioned in this post that you think ministers are facing a crisis of meaning.
Right.
What do you mean by that, and how did that happen?
And I'm thinking here of the COVID era in particular. And again, my experience in ministry is pretty circumscribed to BB. I've been here for over 12 years. And before that, I was at Harding undergrad. And before that, I was at my church growing up in Ohio. So I have a very limited experience in the church, even if I've been working in this church for over 12 years. So I hope that some of this isn't overly autobiographical because I'm not sure how I feel.
Yeah.
But in this age, this era, a couple of years of pandemic,
It really does feel like it has been long enough to define it as an era.
it's an era. It's like that might be an overstatement.
Yeah.
It's just been a couple of years, but
It was like the second Avengers movie. It was the Age of Ultron. It was more like the weekend of Ultron, but no, like this really feels like it's been the age of COVID. Yeah.
Well, and I think the impact that it's had, there's some
Right.
events that happen in our lives and in our society that just make such an impact, even if they happen in a moment. The impact and fallout from them is decades long.
Yeah.
So yeah, one of those, the crises of meaning. I'm thinking of that age of COVID and how churches were handling that, and just how much toll that took on leaderships. Again, whether that's the shepherds, elders, whether that's the preachers or ministers. Along with that, coupling that with a political season, those two things together. And I know I've thought before, just personally, you wonder what sort of difference you're making in the thoughts of the people to whom you're preaching. And you see things that these people whom you love and who are good people, Christian believing people, trying to, all of us are trying to do the best that we can do and be faithful to the Lord. But you see things that they put on Facebook, there things they share, content they share that gives you windows into how they think and what they believe, opinions that they express at church or to you interpersonally. And it can feel as though everyone, that's an overstatement, but it can feel as though such a large percent of your church just already has their minds made up about everything. And even if they're hungry for a word from the Lord, it's possible that they're not looking to the ministry staff at their local congregation for that word, but they've got their own podcasts, they've got their own Christian celebrities. I know that's kind of a pejorative way of putting it, and those can be great figures.
I know what you mean.
I've got my own.
So some of those folks are great, and some of them are wolves in sheep's clothing.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're being discipled, willingly discipled by these other people that these voices on TV or on their podcasts or these books or whatever represent what these parishioners of mine already believe or want to have confirmed in them. And so then as a minister, it's just delicate, tricky. What do you say in the cacophony of voices, and how do you add to that, or how do you slice through it and do some good in your church? And then you labor through a difficult season, and you pray and you work to hold the congregation together, and you still then see people who walk out the door because of because the church didn't handle this thing during the pandemic well. Just as one example, and there's other reasons, but people who you strive to hold together and you think, I don't know that I don't know if anybody can do this. I certainly don't know if I can do this. Is my work making any difference? Are people listening to what I'm saying? Is God using this, or is this just, a place that people come for an event, and they bide their time through the sermon or through the teaching, but not that interested in any of it? And so if you have a congregation that doesn't feel like you're impacting, then I think you start thinking, why am I doing this anyway? There's probably other things I could be doing that would be easier jobs in some sense, that wouldn't be so consuming, like ministry is consuming, that would probably pay better than what I'm making at my church. And you start going through the list of and the headache of having to deal with folks who are disgruntled about this or that. So there's a lot of reasons to be discouraged. There's also reasons to be encouraged, but
Yeah.
there's plenty of reasons to be discouraged.
Yeah. I'm gonna comment and take this in a slightly apocalyptic perspective.
Okay.
And then we can get to the other things that you wanted to say. So this is me, right? This is not Matt Love. This is me. Social media has been great for allowing people to connect and to share their joys. I mean, how easy is it for your extended family to all get to see pictures of your little ones growing up, right? Because you can share that stuff on social media, and that, man, what a blessing to even if you can't physically be present, you can at least witness some of those kinds of things, even if from a distance. But I think what social media has, I think the real devil in the system is the ease with which we can engage in confirmation bias and find ourselves in feedback loops where we just get all the things that we already want to think, and we can continually be fed those things, further strengthening and reinforcing those kinds of ideas. Along with that, the stuff that tends to get more interest on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and everywhere else is the stuff that's more anger inducing than joy inducing. And so here's where the apocalypticism comes in. The stuff that tends to anger people, I don't know if this is necessarily the case, but this, to me at least, seems to be the case, tends to be the case. The stuff that seems to be more anger inducing is usually stuff that's politically based. And I am afraid that a lot of our church members, they wouldn't say this about themselves, but I wonder if they're struggling with another religion, and that's the religion of politics and the worship of political power, in order to, even as well-meaning as using political power in order to help others and do things that, well, we see Jesus teaching us to do. I can't help but wonder if as people are further entrenched into their own perspectives on how the world ought to operate, it's easy for us to say, well, as a Christian you should do X, Y, and Z, or as a Christian you should vote for A, B, and C. And what ends up happening is, a lot of times ministers kind of stand somewhere in the middle of this wild quadrant of social and political convictions, and we say, y'all, let's point toward the cross, because the cross is going to pull us from all of these different directions towards Jesus. And now that I can see everything, basically everything that anybody thinks, as soon as they think it, if they can get online and share that, it's much easier for me to be disheartened and to say, man, like does what I do really mean anything? That's my understanding of one crisis of meaning, which I think dovetails fairly well with how you've put it. Does that make sense? Like, am I off base there?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Who am I to disagree with you, Dr. Burr? But now, one of the things that I'm interested in as a minister is how do we bind our people? This obviously ultimately the work of God, but how do we bind our people so that the next COVID that comes along doesn't tear us apart, or the next political season, or the next whatever it is, controversy in this congregation or whatever? How do we work day by day in times of relative peace to foster that sort of thick unity that can weather the next storm? And I think part of what we've seen in past crises is there's something missing that's holding this group of people, some of the people in this group of people together. There's connections that aren't there that make it easy for someone. One of the most discouraging things to me during the pandemic, just again anecdotally, was the sense that I got from others that the congregation wasn't really of much value, that this congregation and the one 20 minutes away or the one 5 minutes away are more or less interchangeable. I go to church to worship God. It's between me and God. And if this church isn't, letting me do that, or as easily or conveniently or to my preferences as much as I would like, then I can just pick up and move very, very easily. And that was discouraging to me, to see that sort of mentality in even people who'd been at a church for several years. And I know I'm overly simplifying that. I'm sure there's a bit of a struggle there to leave a group of people, but it didn't seem to matter as much as I wanted it to for them. That this wasn't just a congregation. This was the church to which God had called them to be faithful and to live out their lives, and to wrestle with, even when they disagreed, to stay and to fight and to weather long, difficult storms. And instead, sometimes the mentality that's come through is, it's like I could shop at the Walmart in my town, I could shop at it in the next town. I get the same products. And I'm a little more, I try to be a little more mother bear about, this church, and protective of, this is a special place. Don't treat the BB Church of Christ like it's just another Dollar General, or it's just another church.
Matt, there's your next sermon right there.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And I really like how you put that too. This church to which God has called you, whoever this is in our hypothetical situation here, that, man, it'd be great if every church member recognized, hey, perhaps God wants me here, right? This isn't just because I like the start times, or they've got this good, program, or, I like their preacher's funny or whatever. Like, God wants me here because he's got a specific mission for me to embody here at this particular congregation, and to bail on that congregation without any kind of serious discussion or prayer or sense that perhaps God is pushing you elsewhere, to just bail on them, man, that's that's mutually harmful to the individual and to the congregation who lost that individual or their family or whatever.
Well, and if I could add this, just I know you want to shift the conversation, and this is to not put the whole onus of blame on those folks.
Yeah.
But also some of our churches, and I think even our congregation fell into this. If we could have a redo of how we handled parts of what we did during the pandemic, I think we would gladly take a redo on some things.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that some churches communicated to members was attendance didn't really matter. It's all the same to stay home and watch online. It's not your involvement in this congregation isn't ultimately important, but rather physical safety or, other things. And so for right or wrong, I think several folks also got the message of that church attendance and church participation wasn't really essential to their lives. And they stopped coming. And after that, they realized, there's something to that. And so they're still not back. So anyway, it's on. I don't want to just put all the blame on a certain kind of folks.
That's fair.
Folks like me, I've got my own things that I prayerfully need to work through. Yeah.
Well, that's good to bring some balance to this issue, because you're right. There were churches that were willing to disregard any and every sense of keeping others safe, and there were those that seemed to swing hard the other direction, and there were individuals who felt those different ways, and the whole thing was pretty messy and pretty ugly, as people have talked about for the last year and a half now. So, Matt, in order to support ministers then who might feel as if maybe they're experiencing some crisis of meaning in what they're doing, you recommended 5 things. And for those of you who grew up in Churches of Christ, lists of 5 are certainly our favorite number.
Most Christians, it's 3 or 6, but not us.
We enjoy lists of 5 here in the Churches of Christ. Matt, start us out here. I don't know if you have the list in front of you. I've got it in front of me. You might have already internalized that, though, since you're working on Preaching Without Notes, right?
Yeah.
Well, start us out, Matt. What was the first thing that you recommended that churches can do in order to support their ministers?
Was it pray for them?
It was pray for your ministers.
Okay,
and
good.
Let them know. All right, so I'll just read the list and then you can riff on it. Pray for your ministers and let them know you do.
Okay. Yeah. I have had people who tell me that they pray for me every day. And that is really disorienting to me, humbling, to hear this person thinks of me or what I'm doing as so valuable as to include me and my name and what I do here at this church in their daily prayers.
Yeah.
And I've had more than one person tell me that. And the, as far as meaning goes, we tend to pray for things that are meaningful to us. And when you go through trauma or a crisis in your family or your personal life, and you have people praying for you, you know what that means when you have a family around you who are genuinely thinking about you and praying for you hour by hour. So to hear from people that what I do matters so much to them that they would pray about it consistently, is a surge of encouragement to me. So I just recommend, I know we're cautious about letting people know what we pray because we don't want to lose those stars in our crown. And Christ says in Matthew 6 to not let your left hand know what your right hand's doing, and to go
Sure.
into your room, but I do think letting people know that you're praying for them can be a really big boost of encouragement.
Absolutely. It's funny how you mentioned the word disorienting, and it's like, man, what a great word to use to describe this. To some degree, it makes me uncomfortable to have someone tell me that they're praying for me, because I like to think that I'm competent and I've got it together. And hearing someone say that they're praying for you is, like you said, humbling. And I don't like to be humbled, but it's necessary. And it is also encouraging to know that people do think what you do matters, just like you said, that what you do matters, and that it's worth them going to God to talk about that. It's worth them engaging in the spiritual warfare to pray God's blessing and protection over you, and to goodness, and to ensure or to help, do what they can to ensure that that your witness and your and your ministry and things like that, they're not going to get tanked by the enemy's advances. I was talking with a friend in ministry just the other day, telling me about a situation at the church that they work at, and I asked the question, is this an indication that you need to leave, or is this an indication that Satan is trying to ruin something worthwhile? And they felt pretty strongly that it was the latter, that Satan was trying to ruin something worthwhile. And prayer was what they needed. Yeah.
Kind of wakes you up too. In ministry,
Mhm.
it's easy to get into ruts of, I won't say phone it in, but you do it, you preach enough sermons or teach enough classes or whatever task that it is, you do that enough times and you sort of develop a method, step by step, and then the development and the preaching of a sermon can feel like you're just flipping a patty on the grill.
Yeah.
To have someone say they're praying about that, like you said, it's not just competence, but it's also there's this mundaneness to what ministry can feel like week to week, and it can wake you up and help you have the perspective that reminds you that what you're doing is eternally significant.
Yeah. Item number 2 that Matt suggested that we do to support our ministers, particularly for people who are not the preaching minister or not one of the ministers, but listen appreciatively to their preaching and teaching. And as somebody who teaches, starting Sunday, I'm going to be teaching twice a week here at church, and then once a week for HST. Amen, brother. Listen appreciatively to their preaching and teaching. Matt, it should be obvious, but why is that such a big deal?
Well, I wonder if listeners don't assume a very passive posture when it comes to listening to classes and to sermons. And even our auditorium, we call it an auditorium, which has something to do with listening. And one of our elders who's big into music has complained about that before, because it gives the impression of coming and sitting and listening and being very passive. And the appreciative aspect of that is also the active listening part of it too, is as a listener, you bring something to the table as well. Now, it is the speaker, the teacher's task to make listening easy to a degree, to get through to the listener. The onus falls on the speaker more than the listener probably, but the listener too brings something there. And I can think, even right now, I can think of faces, and I think of faces when I'm preaching, because those faces are lit up and lifted up to me, and they don't turn away from me when I'm speaking, or their eye contact doesn't fall away very often. And when everyone else in the congregation looks bored or checking the watch or getting up to go to the restroom, and I'm wondering if anyone is listening, those people in my church, and I can think of them right now, are a boost of encouragement to me, because I know they're listening. I know they're taking notes. And the truth of the matter is, I know that not every sermon that I give is a stellar performance, is groundbreaking, or as good as the podcast that they just listened to. But still, there's got to be something in what I am saying, even if it's just the passage that I read, only the Bible passage and nothing I add to it. There's something there that's worth seeing and listening to and grabbing hold of. So actively and appreciatively listening to your preacher, your teachers, means the world. It's such a big part of what I do is at the ministry of teaching and preaching. And so, that means a lot when I know people are listening to what I bring.
Yeah. But just like in any relationship, whether it's, a work relationship, or, your spouse, or with your children, or just other family members, expressing your appreciation for the good things that they do, even if they're supposed to do it, right? Even if your kids are supposed to do their chores, or even if, it's your job to take out the trash and your wife's job to do this and that, and, like you kind of split the household duties. Just expressing your appreciation for the things that they do, even if they're supposed to do them, goes a long way. Anytime our boys remember to take their plates from the table and put them either in the sink or the dishwasher, I try to tell them, hey, thanks for doing that. Or if they'll do something else. What was it? There's something the other day that our older son did. He was like on his own initiative. We were either like getting ready to go or something. I'm gonna pretend that what I'm saying actually happened. It's not exactly this, but it was something along these lines. So I'm giving in an accurate account without being precise. He like grabbed his brother's water bottle and brought it to the door with him. So because he knew that they would both have it. It's like, hey, Pete, buddy, that was awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate that. Obviously, for your minister who feels the weight of, the dozens or hundreds of people's, burdens and things that they carry, for your minister to feel that weight, and for them to try to speak encouragement or conviction into that week in and week out, for somebody to say, hey, I appreciate what you said, or something along those lines. Yeah, that goes a long way. So, yeah.
Well, I don't know how much time we have. I don't want to belabor this.
We're good, man. We're good.
Okay. Well, I was just going to add to that analogy of your family. I think that's a really good insight, because the saying is familiarity breeds contempt, and when we're with people day by day, like our spouse, it can become easier to not really listen to them when they speak. Whereas if we're around someone new, because of the newness, it's easier. So if a guest preacher comes, or a guest teacher comes to the church, I mean, they start on third base basically, because it's just something different, and it's difference is exciting. But when you're listening to the same preacher week after week for years, then I think it takes even more work for the listener, intentional work, to say, I'm going to pay attention, I'm going to engage, because I'm used to Matt or Kevin or whomever. It's easier to check out, or to assume I know what they're going to say or how they're going to say it. But I'm going to choose to engage instead.
Yeah. Familiarity breeds contempt. what a wild proverb.
Mm.
It should be, Christians should push back on that and say it's like lack of love, like lack of expressed love breeds contempt.
Mm.
Yeah. But you're right. You're right, man. The guest preacher, the guest teacher, it's easy for them to hit a home run. Yeah. Number 3, block and tackle for your minister. I love that. And as soon as I read that, I was like, man, my elders are really good at that. I like these guys. What do you mean by that, Matt? I think I know what you mean. What do you mean by block and tackle for your minister? And tell us about your illustrious history as a football player.
I have zero history as a football player, unless you consider like football, outside of the United States.
Oh, spelled with a U and an accent mark? Okay.
Yeah, I did play soccer in high school, and I love that. But block and tackle, I basically meant by that, make your preacher's life easier and not more difficult. Assume the best, give them the benefit of the doubt. And that even takes place behind closed doors in conversations with other people who might be griping about something that's going on in the church. To block and tackle for your church leaders. I keep saying preacher, but I just mean minister, shepherds, really for one another in the church. We ought to assume the best about each other. And we all need encouragement, and we all need help. And ultimately, we all want what's best for one another and for the entire body. And so getting in each other's ways or making our ways difficult doesn't do anyone any good. And helping your leaders in the church is a great way to help your church. So someone may not necessarily like their preacher, but they like their church. And even if you didn't care that much for your leader, this or that leader of something, you probably have a heart for the work of the church or for this ministry that this person is over, and have a vested interest in that. That impacts all of us. And I thought of Paul's line in Ephesians 5, that my favorite passage on marriage in the Bible, when he talks about no one's ever hated his own flesh. And the point that he's making, as I recall, is, when a spouse does good to the other spouse, that has a reciprocal effect, that you're doing good to them, but it also comes back. So if you do harm to one another, that harm comes back on yourself. And if we love the body of Christ, then we are loving ourselves. And when we pour into the body of Christ, and when we help our ministers and our leaders, we're really helping ourselves. We're not just helping them, but we're helping the impact of the church in our community. Yeah, man, I'm all about that. That's great. I have had to learn this over the years. There was a preacher at a church that I had attended for a little while, and we had a couple of let's be honest, not really bad interactions that just didn't go the way that I thought they should. Like they just, like maybe we just didn't get each other or whatever else like that. And for a while, I just didn't like the guy, just didn't like him. And after some point, I matured enough to say, he's probably not a bad dude, right? He's not a bad guy. We just didn't get off on the right foot for whatever reason. And I was sensitive enough to think that, he must have it out for me or something like that. And, chances are, God doesn't even remember my name. And so I was, I was just annoyed at this for a while, and then gradually began to see, it's like, just give him the benefit of the doubt, man. He might have been handling a bunch of other stuff, and I caught him on, one or two bad days or something like that. And it's really tempting also, especially amongst church members who deal with elders, or even amongst church staff, right? It's easy to have a couple of
not ideal experiences, and then to assume the worst about the person all the time. And so you're right. Giving the benefit of the doubt, you know, not thinking that they're out to get you or something like that. You know, somebody words their emails a little abruptly. They're not trying to be rude necessarily. Maybe they're just used to succinct communication because of their job, and so that's how they do it. You know, not everybody sends their text messages like me. It's like, hey, good morning, how's it going? Hope you had a great Christmas break. Everything's going well. Hey, by the way, can we talk about this thing? Yeah, not everybody does that. Yeah. Matt, number 4 was your personal plea for a raise. No, I'm kidding.
It was I was underhanded, or what do you call that? Through the back door.
Yeah. No. Number 4, financially compensate your ministers appropriately. And you mentioned how you had been speaking with a friend who kind of maybe joked or not joked about the vow of poverty that it seems many churches thrust onto their ministers. Matt, what's the deal there?
Yeah, probably multiple things going on. And I did put the disclaimer at the bottom of the article.
You did, yeah.
That my church has been good to me and my wife. So, yeah, and you know, I can immediately think of multiple people in ministry or who have been in ministry who are not doing stellar in financially, and not at any fault of their own, bad spending or that kind of thing, but just because their job in ministry doesn't pay super well. So they're struggling, looking ahead to retirement, or maybe they're in retirement, and just makes things really difficult. And I wish it were not that way. And not every church has members and the sort of income that can support a preacher as well as maybe this other church. So there's all kinds of variables there. Yeah. But if possible, support your minister. And that's all done, in my understanding, from what I've heard and studied. You support a minister so that that person can basically focus on their ministry and not have to be anxious about their family's financial position, you know, their dwindling bank accounts, their retirement in a few years. You take all of that off the table by supporting them well, so that they don't have to look for another job or a second job. And some of that may look like members reaching more deeply into their pockets to give. And I grew up in a small church, we had less than 100 people in it. And I was a kid then, so I don't really know the intricacies of the financial situation there. But I'm thinking of smaller, might even say single cell or less than 100 people churches, that you think, well, we don't have money in the budget for that. Well, it may be that the people there in the pews could or should be able to reach a little more deeply into their pockets in order to make the life of their minister more easily. So just feeling like there's nothing in the budget for that, we can't give a raise, that doesn't necessarily work as a cop-out. If you value your minister, again, if you value your church, and you're able to give that person a livable salary for them, for their family, for where they live, for the stage of life that they're in, and take care of them in that way, you're doing a good service, to them, to the kingdom.
Yeah. I had a minister friend a while ago who was working for, again, like you described, a smaller church. And per that church's agreement, that church was supposed to give him a raise after 6 months. And after 6 months went by, one of the elders mentioned that to him and said, you were supposed to get a raise after 6 months, right? And he said, yeah. And the elder said, I just don't see how we can do that. And that was the end of the discussion. One brought up again. And I mean, it was tough for him to hear, but like, what could he do? Right. Yeah. And so, man, I had another point that I was going to, oh, yeah, here it is. Right. And Matt, this is not you. Okay. This is me. So if anybody's hearing this, all right, this is not Matt's take. This is my hot take. Okay. It is never appropriate. This is my opinion. This is never appropriate for any church to ask the minister that you are hiring or that you want to hire what their spouse does, so you can get a sense of the kind of income that they have to justify how little or much you pay your minister. Because in what other world does it matter what your spouse makes for your job? I know that's not the situation here, but I know that there are people out there who deal with that, and it is so bizarre and wild to think that would have any that would bear any weight whatsoever on this issue. No.
Well, and I would add to all of that, I think those are all good points. Sometimes it just takes one person in the eldership to take care of your minister financially. And I think that the church is run by volunteers primarily. And like in our congregation, there's a couple of us that are paid. Besides that, it's all volunteers. And I think of some of the people who take up the responsibility to oversee things like that in our church that I'm very grateful for. But it's you think it's nobody's job. It's got to be somebody's job to say, I'm going to block and tackle for the minister. I'm going to be the elder in the room who has the preacher's best interest in mind, and who's going to have the conversation and bring up the conversation rather than make it on the minister for them to bring it up. So one person can make all the difference in the world there.
Yep, I think so. Matt, the fifth thing you said, include your ministers. And I love how you said, I know that we preacher types can be odd. And then in parentheses right after that, somebody in my own church reading this just laughed too loud. I felt just like you think of faces when you're putting together your sermons. I feel like you were thinking of some faces when you wrote
Definitely.
that line.
Yeah. Yep.
Matt, what do you mean by include your minister?
Well, we're going back to the issue of meaning and of discouragement. And there's few things that are as discouraging as feeling isolated and feeling like you are a hired hand in the church, especially in churches of Christ. Our polity is kind of a little wonky, in my opinion. The preacher is, so I mean, it's good, and it's also kind of wonky.
Explain what you mean by that, because I think I know what you mean by that, but I bet there's somebody here listening and say, well, what are you talking about? That's the way they did it in the Bible.
That's right. Yeah. So maybe so, but
it's up for debate.
That's up for debate here. But in our polity, in our organization and hierarchy of who's in charge in churches, we appeal to a board. Multiple elders in the church is what we think is the typical way that was done. Yeah. But one of the things
we see that we see that in Scripture. Yeah, absolutely. We see elders and deacons. We see that in Scripture. No doubt about it.
Yes, and but it can relegate the way that we organize the church. It can relegate the minister to something that's not pastoral or shepherding, so that the minister, and this gets back even to Reformation, priesthood of all believers sort of thing, and then that's an emphasis in churches of Christ too, is hey, everyone's a priest, so everybody can preach, and so the minister is really I don't know, just kind of in no man's land there between a leader in the church, but really not a leader in the church. So maybe it's a genius checks and balance sort of thing, but the person who's typically doing the teaching, which in my seems to me to be a shepherd, from Scripture's emphasis on shepherds who teach, the sheep know the shepherd's voice, is typically the preacher. So I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but that no man's land is kind of maybe a good image for the preacher, that it can
It was
feel
isolating. You said it was isolating. Yeah.
and just a hired hand. You're not even really in the leadership, not maybe like de facto have some leadership, but the de jure actual leadership here is the elders and not you. And then the church also, looking the other way, knows that the preacher's not them also.
Right.
And
On paper, the elders have, sorry to interrupt. On paper, and based on what we see in Scripture, the elders have power and authority. And a lot of times, preachers, perhaps, maybe it's better to specify, in predominantly white churches of Christ, because I think subcultural differences make a difference. I think. I could be wrong, and I'm more than happy to talk with some friends who are not in predominantly white churches of Christ, who ministers are not in predominantly white churches of Christ, to correct me. But I think sometimes there are differences, at least based on what these individuals have told me, that I'm thinking of. And again, that's my take, not Matt's. Okay, so if you're listening, don't pin that on Matt. But elders have the power and authority. The preachers carry out the duties and the expectations, or the ministers carry out the duties and the expectations with what can be no power and authority either, if that was pressed. Now, a lot of times, a lot of elderships are good at sharing power and authority, but it really can be that, basically that divided.
Yeah.
So
And
anyway, go ahead.
feel like, and I know ministers who felt this way, like a hired hand. I mean, you have bosses and you're going to do this or you're going to whatever. So the inclusion you mentioned with elders, and unfortunately, my elders here have I think made an intentional effort to include me, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm not an elder, and I don't, at this point in my life, don't aspire to be one. But the sense of being included in the leadership is huge. My point in the article on that note was included as a human and as a Christian. And because we can be different, because the preacher just feels, I mean, I've been so anecdotal here again. This was in my own family at a funeral, and go out in the parking lot to see someone and they're smoking a cigarette, and I walk up and they like try to throw it away really quick and like hide it from me. I'm like, you're smoking a cigarette. What is going on?
I could literally smell it on you.
Yeah, right. The smoke is right there under your foot. I can see it. But it's, it's like I come from another planet, or like I wouldn't understand if someone, that sort of thing. So again, it's like this other, the preacher is other. And I think that's really deadly for a long-term relationship in a church. And that'd be a great conversation at some point, to have a longer talk about what does an intimate friendship connection look like with a minister and their congregation, because there are some things to be mindful of. And I don't think it's my task to be 100% transparent with every person in the church. I mean, none of us would do that.
But it's a practical impossibility. Yeah.
Practical, yeah. And
Yeah.
but there ought to be real friends, not just people who like feel obligated to invite you to different functions, but true friends who see you as a friend.
Mhm.
And I think if you're missing that in a church, I don't know if you'll be there for very long or you'll just be miserable through your working there. But having real friends who include you is a lifesaver.
Yeah. Matt, let me pose this one last question, and then we can kind of summarize and wrap up here. Talk about the importance of true friends at a church. Why do you think is it sometimes difficult for ministers to gain real, genuine friends in the congregations they serve?
Well, one of those first thing that comes to my mind is the length of the tenure with the church.
Sure.
And a minister who's not with the church for very long is going to have a hard time. Really,
Naturally.
relationships just take time, and
Yeah.
those they fall into place. You can work on them, but you also can't really force them. So it's part of it's a time equation. Part of it's on the minister. You know, I know I can, as an introverted person, I can want to go read my books and withdraw, work on my lesson, be in my own
Yeah.
mind, go with, spend that time with my family. And not all ministers are extroverted. Probably most aren't extroverted.
It amazes me how many of my friends who are in ministry are introverts. It's wild. It's absolutely wild.
Not the stereotype. The stereotype is, the mega church pastor who's outgoing and confident, boisterous.
Buddies with everybody. Yeah.
me.
It's really funny. Somebody said this years ago, and it struck me as odd that a lot of people go into ministry thinking that it's going to be really relational. And what ends up happening is they find themselves kind of isolated. A lot of people go into scholarship and academic teaching because they love reading and study, and they find that they're constantly surrounded by students and on committees and things like that. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, that makes sense that it can, just the length of time can be there. There is also, ministers do kind of pick up on this, that sometimes it is tough to discern, is this person in my congregation, are they warming up to me because they genuinely love me and care about me? Or is it because I have this title? And then if I no longer have this title, are we done? Yeah, that's a real concern. So, yeah. Well, Matt, this is a stellar list. And like I said, I'm going to link to this in the description of the episode here. Matt, is there anything else, any kind of final opinion you want to put in on this, of how we can support our ministers, or maybe like what's one good small step that somebody can do to begin the process of in a healthy way supporting their church's ministers?
Yeah, I would just say, next time you see your minister, let them know that they mean something to you. Send them a card, that kind of thing. And then periodically let them know that they mean something to you, that you're praying for them. I think that'd go a long way.
Yeah. Matt, really appreciate your time today, sir.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right. Take care, brother. Oh, before we go, I wanted to mention this. You had talked about maybe a conversation for another time, talking with another minister about the process of gaining friends or something, or like friendship in ministry. You named the other minister, and the three of us will have that conversation here on the podcast. Okay,
That sounds great.
dangle that carrot there. You pick your other minister, and we'll do that. Okay.
Sounds great.
Love you, Matt.
Love you too, Kevin. Thank you.
Bye bye.